Picture standing under the vast, star-strewn sky of the Australian outback, where the land itself seems to whisper secrets older than time. These whispers are the stories of the Aboriginal Dreamtime, ancient narratives woven into the very fabric of the continent, holding truths that stretch back tens of thousands of years. But what if I told you these stories are more than myths? What if they're hidden histories etched into the landscape, waiting to be deciphered? Today, we're setting out on a journey to uncover 25 astonishing secrets of the Dreamtime, revelations that connect the past to the present in ways you've never imagined. Think of the Dreamtime as a vast living library, where every rock formation, river, and constellation is a page in an unbroken story. These tales aren't just about creation, they're maps, survival guides, and moral codes passed down through countless generations. The elders speak of ancestor spirits who shaped the world, but what if these beings were more than symbolic? What if their journeys left physical marks hidden in plain sight that modern science is only beginning to understand? From the sprawling red deserts to the dense rainforests, the land itself is a puzzle, and the Dreamtime holds the key. This isn't just a story about Australia, it's a story about humanity. The Dreamtime invites us to see the world differently, to question what we think we know about history, and to listen to the wisdom of cultures that have thrived here for millennia. By the end of this journey, you'll never look at the outback or the night sky the same way again. So let's step into the footprints of the ancestors and uncover the mysteries they left behind. The Dreamtime is calling. Are you ready to answer? One of the most profound threads in the Dreamtime tapestry is the story of the creation ancestors, beings who didn't just shape the land but became it. Take the Rainbow Serpent, known by many names across Aboriginal nations, Wolunqua to the Warramunga, Yingana to the Kunwinchku. This vast, winding spirit didn't merely slither across the earth, it carved rivers with its body, raised mountains with its coils, and left waterholes where it rested. Modern geologists have found something startling. Many of these serpentine waterways align with ancient fault lines and erosion patterns, as if the stories preserved memories of the continent's violent birth. But the Rainbow Serpent is just one piece of the puzzle. In Arnhem Land, the creator being Warramungunji is said to have placed children in the landscape, turning them into the first plants and animals. Scientists now recognize these tales as eerily accurate accounts of ecological shifts, like the disappearance of Megafauna thousands of years ago, described in some stories as the ancestors growing quiet. Even more astonishing are the Songlines, intricate oral maps that trace the paths of these ancestral journeys. When linguists compared them to migration routes reconstructed through DNA studies, the overlaps were uncanny, as if the Dreamtime had kept a living record of humanity's first footsteps across Australia. What's revelatory isn't just the accuracy of these narratives, but their depth. The Jabwurrung people speak of Bunjil, the eagle ancestor who shaped the stars, and their star maps mirror constellations used for navigation long before European telescopes. When elders describe volcanoes erupting or seas rising, their descriptions match geological events from 12,000 years ago. This isn't mythology, it's intergenerational knowledge passed down with such precision that it defies modern assumptions about oral history. The land doesn't just hold these stories, it confirms them. So why does this matter? Because the Dreamtime doesn't just recount the past, it offers a lens to see connections we've forgotten. When a Yolngu elder points to a rock formation and names it the resting place of a creator spirit, they're not just sharing a tale. They're preserving a ledger of environmental change, a warning about fragile ecosystems, and a challenge to listen to the earth as they have for millennia. The creation ancestors weren't just shaping the world, they were teaching how to belong to it, and that lesson might be more vital now than ever. Now imagine walking through the outback at night with no compass, no GPS, just the stars above and a song in your heart. That song could be the difference between life and death, because for Aboriginal cultures, the night sky isn't just a spectacle, it's a roadmap written in light. These celestial pathways are part of something far grander, the Songlines, a living navigation system where every verse corresponds to landmarks, water sources, and even the positions of stars. What Western science calls astronomy, the Dreamtime calls story, and these stories have guided travelers across Australia for over 65,000 years. Take the constellation Westerners know as the Southern Cross. To the Wardaman people, it's the foot of the Creator, being Nguruguya and Galjul, a giant emu whose body stretches across the Milky Way. But this isn't just mythic imagery, it's practical science. Elders describe how the emu's knees align with dark patches in the galaxy, now recognized by astronomers as interstellar dust clouds, marking seasonal changes when emu eggs are ripe for gathering. Similarly, the Yolngu people of Arnhem Land sing of Barnumber, the morning star Venus, as a celestial rope tying the living to the spirit world. Their songs detail its path so precisely that anthropologists have matched them to Venus's 8-year cycle, a pattern European astronomers didn't document until the 17th century. The brilliance of these systems lies in their layers. A single songline might weave together topography, botany, and astronomy into one cohesive guide. For example, the Pitjantjatjara people's travels follow the story of the Seven Sisters, a star cluster Western science calls the Pleiades. Their songs describe the sisters fleeing across the sky, pursued by the hunter Orion, known as Niru. But the verses also encode warnings. When Niru rises in winter, it signals the arrival of cold desert nights, while the sisters' position marks the onset of bush onion season. Modern researchers have found these oral calendars correlate with ecological events down to the week, preserved across generations with startling accuracy. What's even more astonishing is how these celestial stories cross continents. The emu in the sky narrative appears in over 40 Aboriginal nations, from the Kimberley to Tasmania, yet local variations adjust for regional geography. In coastal communities, the emu's legs point to tidal patterns, while desert versions align with drought-resistant plant cycles. This isn't coincidence, it's a deliberate, adaptive science, proving these cultures didn't just observe the stars, they integrated them into every facet of survival. Today, astrophysicists are collaborating with elders to decode this knowledge, uncovering subtle astronomical references in songs once thought purely ceremonial. The Borong people's story of Werpel, the wedge-tailed eagle, corresponds to the star Sirius, but their description of its smoke matches modern observations of the star's atmospheric scintillation. Meanwhile, the Kamilaroi tale of Biome's canoe, formed by the Coalsack Nebula, includes details about its dark currents that align with interstellar gas movements. These aren't just stories, they're observational records rivaling the notebooks of Tycho Brahe or Galileo. Perhaps the most poignant lesson lies in the songline's resilience. Unlike static star charts, these oral traditions adapt, shifting with changes in the land or sky. When a river dries up or a star's brightness fades over centuries, the songs evolve to reflect it, creating a living dialogue between people and cosmos. In an age where light pollution obscures the stars for most of us, Aboriginal cultures still teach how to navigate by them, not as distant points of light, but as ancestors whispering directions across time. The next time you look up at the night sky, remember, those constellations aren't just pictures, they're chapters in the oldest surviving library on Earth. Deep in the heart of Dreamtime stories, there are whispers of creatures so enormous they make today's kangaroos seem tiny beasts with towering legs, razor-sharp claws, and thunderous footsteps that shook the earth. These aren't just legends, they might be echoes of Australia's lost megafauna, preserved in oral traditions for thousands of years after the animals vanished. Scientists have uncovered fossils of giant wombats the size of rhinos, marsupial lions with bone-crushing jaws, and flightless birds twice as tall as a person. But what's astonishing is how closely Aboriginal descriptions mirror these long-extinct species, suggesting these stories aren't myths, they're memories. Consider the Ungarangeri people's tales of the Kadamakara, colossal beings said to have wandered the desert before turning to stone. Their accounts describe creatures with massive hind legs and thick tails, details aligning perfectly with Diprotodon, the largest marsupial ever discovered. Even more striking are the Gunditjmara stories of Tijukurpa, giant predators that stalked the land. Paleontologists point to Thylacoleo, a lion-sized marsupial with retractable claws and a bite stronger than a modern big cat's. The parallels don't stop there. In Queensland, elders speak of bunyips lurking in waterholes, their bone-chilling cries echoing at dusk. Some researchers suggest these could be distorted recollections of palochests, a tapir-like herbivore with a trunk and powerful limbs, whose fossils are often found near ancient lakes. But how could oral traditions outlast the animals themselves by tens of thousands of years? The answer lies in the precision of Aboriginal storytelling. Unlike written records, these narratives were woven into rituals, dances, and cave paintings, reinforced with every retelling. The Yarralin people's description of Miharung, a colossal bird that strode like a man, matches Genyorni's, a 500-pound flightless bird that went extinct around 40,000 years ago. Even more remarkable, some rock art in Arnhem Land depicts creatures with elongated necks and stilt-like legs uncannily similar to Megalania, a monitor lizard longer than a crocodile. These aren't generic monsters, they're eerily specific. The implications are profound. If these stories truly trace back to eyewitness accounts, they'd represent the oldest surviving human records of extinct species. While European naturalists only began piecing together megafauna fossils in the 19th century, Aboriginal cultures may have carried these memories for hundreds of generations. Some elders even describe environmental shifts like lakes drying up or forests disappearing that align with climatic changes believed to have driven megafauna to extinction. This isn't just about giant animals, it's about a living archive of ecological upheaval, passed down with a fidelity that challenges everything we thought we knew about oral history. What's haunting is how these stories often end. Many speak of the giants growing weak, their food vanishing, their spirits retreating into the land. Modern science tells a similar tale. As Australia's climate grew harsher and humans arrived, megafauna populations collapsed. The Dreamtime doesn't just remember these creatures, it mourns them. And perhaps that's the greatest lesson here. In a world racing toward another mass extinction, these stories aren't just relics of the past. They're warnings carved not in stone, but in the enduring voice of the world's oldest culture. There's a fiery thread woven through the Dreamtime stories of mountains that roared to life, spewing flames and ash across the land. To the Gamilaroi people, the Warrumbungle Range isn't just a scenic backdrop. It's the remnant of a battle between ancestral giants, their clashes so violent they set the earth itself on fire. Modern geologists confirm this wasn't just metaphor. These jagged peaks are the eroded stumps of volcanoes that erupted 13 million years ago. But here's the mystery: how could oral traditions preserve details of events so ancient, long before humans walked the continent? The answer lies in the precision of these accounts. The Gundungurra people near the Blue Mountains tell of Murragan, a powerful spirit who fought a gigantic kangaroo. Their struggle so fierce it ignited explosions that formed the Genelan Caves. Today, scientists recognize these caves as limestone karsts, but they sit atop a volcanic plateau, remnants of lava flows that once seared the region. Even more striking are the durable stories from Queensland, describing a time when the sky turned black and rivers of fire devoured the forests. These details align with the Kinrara volcano's eruption just 7,000 years ago, one of Australia's most recent volcanic events. Elders even pinpoint where survivors fled to sandy ridges where ash couldn't bury them, matching geological evidence of pyroclastic flows. What's revelatory isn't just the accuracy, but the layered wisdom in these narratives. The Jabwurrung speak of Tichingal, the emu spirit, whose anger caused the earth to split open near Mount Napier. Geologists confirm this area was a hotspot for lava vents, but the stories go further. They warn against disturbing certain rocks, calling them Tichingal's eggs. Modern tests reveal these eggs are volcanic bombs, globs of molten rock that solidified midair. The tales aren't just history, they're hazard maps encoding where eruptions might recur. Perhaps the most haunting accounts come from the Tasmanian Palawa, who describe a time when the moon fell from the sky and the sea boiled. Researchers now link this to the underwater Heard Island volcanoes, whose massive eruptions could have triggered tsunamis. The stories even note how coastal clans moved inland beforehand, suggesting they recognized precursor earthquakes. This isn't just storytelling, it's survival science refined over millennia. So why does this matter today? Because these narratives challenge our assumptions about time and memory. When a Gippsland elder points to a weathered hill and calls it the place where the fire mountain slept, they're not just sharing a legend. They're preserving a record of planetary forces that shaped the continent, forces we're only now learning to read. The Dreamtime doesn't just remember these cataclysms, it asks us to listen, because the land's fiery past might still hold lessons for its future. Around 7,000 years ago, something extraordinary happened along Australia's coastline. The ocean began creeping inland, swallowing familiar landscapes as sea levels rose by nearly 400 feet. But this wasn't just a geological event. It was etched into the memory of the continent's first peoples through flood stories so vivid they mirror the science with uncanny precision. From the Kimberley to Tasmania, Aboriginal nations tell of ancestral spirits unleashing towering waves, of saltwater invading freshwater springs, and of entire clans retreating as their hunting grounds vanished beneath the sea. What's astonishing isn't just the consistency of these accounts, it's how closely they align with modern reconstructions of Australia's drowned coastlines. Take the Gunditjmara people of Victoria, who described Tarn Wirrung, a time when the sea surged inland, transforming volcanic plains into what's now Port Phillip Bay. Their oral histories detail how the bay's entrance was once a narrow river, beyond which lay dry land stretching to distant mountains. Geologists confirm this. Core samples reveal that the bay was indeed a freshwater marsh until around 7,000 years ago, when rising seas breached a sandy barrier near present-day Sorrento. Even more striking are the Yanuwa stories from the Gulf of Carpentaria, where elders speak of a vast freshwater Lake Barrow Creek that turned salty overnight. Marine archaeologists have since mapped an ancient lakebed beneath the Gulf's waters, a relic of the Sahel Shelf exposed during the last ice age. The parallels grow even deeper when you examine regional variations. In Arnhem Land, the Mungai people recount how the Rainbow Serpent and Galliot grew angry, lashing its tail to flood the land and separate what's now New Guinea from the mainland. Bathymetric surveys show this separation wasn't mythical, it was the inundation of the Arafura Shelf around 10,000 years ago, which turned a land bridge into open ocean. Meanwhile, the Ungarangeri of South Australia preserve songs about Ngurunderi, a creator who chased his wives across the exposed continental shelf, only for the sea to rise and drown them near Kangaroo Island. Underwater archaeological sites in the area, like stone tools found 60 feet below current sea levels, silently corroborate these narratives. What's revelatory is how these stories encode practical survival lessons. The Tiwi people's flood myths warn against building homes too close to the shore, describing how entire camps were swept away when the tides began walking inland. Sediment studies on Melville Island reveal exactly where and how these inundations occurred, with shell middens abruptly buried under marine deposits. Similarly, the Kabai of Queensland tell of Dinawan, the emu spirit, leading clans to higher ground as the Moreton Bay Basin flooded, a route modern researchers have traced using elevation models and preserved midden sites. These aren't just tales, they're adaptive strategies refined over generations and embedded in ceremony to ensure their preservation. The most haunting accounts come from Tasmania's Palawa people, who describe a time when the Bass Strait was a grassy plain dotted with kangaroo herds. Their stories of Marona, the Great Flood, recount how the sea ate the land until Tasmania was cut off from the mainland. Core samples from the seafloor confirm this. Pollen analysis shows a sudden shift from land vegetation to marine sediments around 12,000 years ago. But here's what science alone can't convey: the Palawa's emotional precision. They sing of the despair as ancestral pathways vanished underwater, of staring across the newly formed strait at kin they could no longer reach. When archaeologists recently discovered submerged Aboriginal sites off Tasmania's northwest coast, the elders' response was simple: we never forgot they were there. This interplay of myth and geology raises profound questions. How did oral traditions maintain such granular details across hundreds of generations? Part of the answer lies in the rigidity of Aboriginal knowledge systems, where stories were tied to sacred sites and reinforced through ritual. A single error in reciting a flood narrative could mean misidentifying safe routes or forgetting submerged resource areas. But perhaps the deeper lesson is about perspective. Where Western science sees post-glacial sea level rise as an abstract process, the Dreamtime frames it as a lived trauma, a reminder that environmental upheavals aren't just data points but chapters in a human story. As we face our own era of rising seas, these ancient memories offer something invaluable, not just a record of the past but a mirror for our future. When the Bass Strait swallowed the last land bridge to mainland Australia, Tasmania didn't just become an island, it became a cultural time capsule, preserving Dreamtime stories unlike any others. The Palawa people's narratives evolved in isolation for 10,000 years, weaving tales where the sea wasn't just a boundary but a character, a force that reshaped their world forever. Their creation stories don't feature the Rainbow Serpent or other mainland figures. Instead, they speak of Moirin, the great spirit who molded Tasmania's jagged peaks and misty valleys from ice and wind. The difference isn't just in names but in perspective. Here, the land wasn't sung into being, it was quarried, sculpted by ancestral hands in a world growing smaller with every rising tide. One of the most haunting threads in these stories is Riawarawa, the time of deep cold. Palawa elders describe an era when glaciers clawed down from the highlands and the sea became too hungry, swallowing coastal camps. Modern climatologists recognize this as the Younger Dryas period, 12,000 years ago when Tasmania's temperatures plummeted. But the stories go further. They name specific valleys where clans sheltered, like Larapuna, where archaeological digs have uncovered hearths and tools from that exact epoch. The precision chills the spine. These aren't vague legends but frozen memories of survival. Then there's Trawana, the Palawa's name for Tasmania itself, which means land of echoes. Their stories tell how the flooding Bass Strait amplified sounds across the water, allowing mainland kin to hear their songs for generations after separation. Acoustic studies now show this wasn't poetic license. Sound waves do travel unusually far across the strait's shallow banks, especially at dawn. The tales even describe trade routes maintained through smoke conversations between mountaintop fires, a practice verified by charcoal layers in identical sequences on islands across the strait. But what truly sets Tasmanian Dreamtime apart are the Ninjane Tunapri, the sky ancestors. Unlike mainland stories of earth-bound creators, these spirits arrived from the stars, teaching the Palawa to navigate by the Southern Cross, which they call Crow's Foot, and to harvest muttonbirds by the phases of the moon. Astronomers note that Tasmania's southern latitude makes its night sky uniquely crowded with bright constellations. A celestial map the Palawa encoded in bark carvings that match star positions from 10 millennia ago. The most poignant difference lies in the endings. While mainland Dreamtime often cycles eternally, Tasmanian stories speak of Marona's return, a prophecy that the seas will one day recede, reconnecting Trowana to the mainland. Geologists confirm this isn't fantasy. Sea levels have fluctuated before, but the deeper message resonates across the ages. Isolation never meant oblivion. Even cut off by roaring waters, the Palawa kept their stories alive, not just as history, but as a promise whispered to the waves. Now consider this across the planet, separated by oceans and millennia. The Aboriginal peoples of Australia and the Dogon of Mali share celestial secrets so specific they defy coincidence. Both cultures speak of a companion star to Sirius, invisible to the naked eye yet described with startling accuracy long before telescopes confirmed its existence. The Dogon call it Potolo, a tiny, dense star made of the heaviest matter, while Aboriginal elders in the Kimberley describe it as Jindalee, the small but mighty one orbiting the bright dog star. Modern astronomy knows it as Sirius B, a white dwarf so dense a teaspoon of its matter would weigh tons, precisely as both traditions asserted, but the connections run deeper than a single star. The Wardaman people of northern Australia map the same three-star system. The Dogon venerate Sirius A, B, and a hypothetical Sirius C, which astronomers still debate. Both cultures depict these stars in nearly identical ceremonial art, concentric circles with offset dots, resembling contemporary astrophysical diagrams of Sirius's orbital dynamics. Even more striking are the shared references to a 50-year cycle. The Dogon celebrate the Sigwi festival, marking Sirius B's elliptical orbit, while Aboriginal star charts track its movement across generations, noting it turns around every half-century. Sirius B's actual orbital period, 50 years exactly. How could two unconnected cultures develop such precise knowledge? Some scholars point to ancient maritime links, evidence of African crops in Australia and Aboriginal genetic markers in Madagascar hinting at prehistoric contact. Others suggest a more profound possibility, that these traditions stem from an even older, lost civilization's astronomy, preserved independently. The Yolngu and Dogon both describe their star wisdom as gifts from visitors from the sky, beings who descended bearing knowledge. Intriguingly, both cultures locate these teachers' origin point in the same patch of the Milky Way near the constellation Westerners call Orion. Skeptics argue these parallels are coincidental, but the specificity is hard to dismiss. The Dogon and certain Aboriginal groups share nearly identical descriptions of Jupiter's 4 largest moons, invisible without lenses, calling them hidden children or quiet followers. Both speak of Saturn's rings as the encircling rope, and their creation myths describe planetary orbits as spiraling paths, matching modern understandings of gravity's effects. Even their warnings align. Each culture cautions against disturbing certain sacred stones that fell from the sky, now identified as meteorites with high uranium content. Perhaps the most haunting parallel lies in what these traditions prioritize. While Western astronomy long fixated on predicting eclipses or solstices, both Aboriginal and Dogon systems track subtle stellar phenomena, the flickering of variable stars, the proper motion of Sirius across millennia. This suggests their sky watching wasn't just ritualistic, but a sustained scientific endeavor. Today, astrophysicists collaborate with Dogon priests and Aboriginal elders to decode these oral star catalogues, uncovering observations that predate written records by thousands of years. What emerges isn't just a mystery of cultural diffusion, but a challenge to the very timeline of human knowledge. If these traditions are independent, they reveal an innate human capacity to discern cosmic patterns with startling precision. If linked, they hint at forgotten chapters of global exchange, when ideas crossed continents we now assume were isolated. Either way, the message is clear. The oldest stories written in the stars might still have truths to teach us if we're willing to listen across the divide of time. Beneath the surface of Dreamtime stories lies a hidden web. an intricate network of trade routes that once connected every corner of Australia, from the ochre pits of the Flinders Ranges to the pearl shell coves of the Kimberley. These weren't just economic exchanges, they were sacred journeys encoded in songlines and ceremony, where every exchange carried meaning deeper than the objects themselves. Take the Pitjantjatjara people's Tijukurpa stories, which describe the Koltukatjara, the meeting place of waters, a site modern archaeologists now recognize as a nexus for trading pituri, a potent medicinal plant. But here's what's extraordinary. The songs don't just mention the location, they detail the entire route, waterholes, landmarks, and even the best seasons to travel, preserving logistics that match residue traces found on ancient grinding stones hundreds of miles apart. The trade in ochre, the vibrant ceremonial pigment, reveals even more sophistication. The Yolngu people sing of Buralku, the ochre path, a series of waypoints stretching from Arnhem Land to South Australia. These songs describe specific shades like the deep red juwar from Wilgemere, said to be the blood of the ancestral kangaroo malu. Chemical analysis confirms this. Ochre found in Queensland burial sites has been traced back to Wilgemere, nearly 2,000 kilometers away, with trade routes mirroring the songlines almost exactly. Even more remarkable are the warnings embedded in these stories. The Warlpiri speak of Yankiri, the emu ancestor, who cursed certain ochre pits if traders took more than they needed, a lesson in sustainability now echoed by ecologists studying the mine's delicate ecosystems. Then there's the pearl shell trade, where Dreamtime narratives double as navigational charts. The Bardi Jawi people's stories of Luruju, the shining water serpent, describe its path from the Dampier archipelago to the desert, where shells were traded for wangi seeds. These accounts align with marine archaeology. Shell artifacts found inland still bear notches matching the Bardi Jawi's descriptions of serpent marks, used to denote value. The songs even reference tides and currents critical for safe shell diving, knowledge later confirmed by maritime historians studying ancient canoe designs. But the most astonishing trade item might be the Tijuringa, sacred stone or wood objects inscribed with ancestral maps. Arabana elders tell of Mudlarka, the stone carriers, who transported these objects along songlines, exchanging them only during ceremonies. The stones themselves are puzzles. Some contain mineral signatures from multiple distant quarries, suggesting they were passed along trade networks like spiritual passports. Modern geologists have used these fingerprints to reconstruct routes that predate Egypt's pyramids, with some stones traveling farther than the Silk Road's lapis lazuli. What's revelatory isn't just the scale of these networks, but their resilience. When droughts hit or seas rose, the stories adapted, redirecting routes to new water sources or warning of collapsed paths. The Ngaju people's tales of Kaliu, the water serpent, describe how its body shifted during dry times, closing some trade routes while opening others. Pollen studies in the Nullarbor Plain confirm these shifts, showing how trade goods abruptly changed direction during climatic upheavals thousands of years ago. These narratives aren't just history, they're a testament to interconnectedness. A single Tijuringa might link a coastal artisan, a desert elder, and a rainforest healer through stories older than nations. In an era where we map supply chains with satellites, the Dreamtime reminds us that the oldest GPS wasn't technology, it was memory sung into the land itself. Long before paleontologists brushed the dirt from Australia's first dinosaur bones, Aboriginal communities may have already been telling their stories. Scattered across the continent are Dreamtime accounts of creatures that bear a striking resemblance to fossils lying beneath the very same soil. Take the Kadamakara of the Central Desert, described as massive, lizard-like beings with bony crests who sank into the earth during the Great Drying. In the 19th century, miners near Cooper Creek stumbled upon the fossilized remains of Muttaburrasaurus, a duck-billed dinosaur with a distinctive nasal crest, buried in what was once an ancient riverbed. The overlap is uncanny. Both the fossils and the stories cluster in the same region, and the Kadamakara's bone hats mirror the dinosaur's cranial ornamentation. Then there's the Yaramaiha, a tiny, blood-drinking creature from Yolngu lore with a mouth full of needle-like teeth and the ability to regenerate lost limbs. While it might sound like a mythic vampire, compare it to Leelinosaura, a small, swift dinosaur whose fossils show packed, serrated teeth ideal for piercing flesh, and whose habitat, the Antarctic Circle of the Cretaceous, forced adaptations akin to hibernation or extreme resilience. Even the Yaramaiha, whose red skin and tree-dwelling habits align with hypotheses about these dinosaurs' camouflaged arboreal lifestyles. Perhaps most compelling are the stories from the Kimberley, where Wandjina paintings depict malangu, giant lizards with elongated necks and whip-like tails. Nearby, in the Broome Sandstone, lie the footprints of sauropods, long-necked dinosaurs like Australopithecus, with tracks so vast local elders call them the footprints of the ancestors. Some rock art even shows these creatures with spikes or frills, matching fossil evidence of armored dinosaurs like Cunborosaurus. The consistency is staggering. These aren't generic monsters, but detailed portrayals that mirror paleontological discoveries made millennia later. But how could ancient peoples interpret bones they had no scientific framework to understand? The answer lies in the Aboriginal approach to the land. Where Western science sees disjointed fossils, Dreamtime narratives perceive continuity, ancestral beings whose spirits still reside in the earth. The Diri people, for example, describe the mindy, colossal serpents whose bones turn to stone, yet whose essence lingers in opalized fossils. Modern miners in Kuba Pedy still whisper of stumbling upon these serpent stones, their iridescent surfaces gleaming like scales. This interplay raises profound questions. Did Aboriginal elders encounter diprotodon skulls and see the bunyip? Did the thundering steps of Australopithecus echo in stories of the Miharung? The land itself seems to say yes. In Queensland, a sandstone cave holds both fossilized dinosaur tracks and Aboriginal engravings of the same creatures, side by side, as if the stories were etched not just in memory, but in the very stone that preserved the bones. The Dreamtime doesn't just recount the past, it reanimates it, inviting us to hear the Earth's oldest tales with new ears. To the untrained ear, Dreamtime stories might sound like ancient myths, but listen closer and you'll hear something extraordinary: the precise turning of seasons, the rhythmic pulse of nature encoded in every verse. Aboriginal cultures didn't just observe the environment, they wove it into a living calendar system, one that tracked subtle ecological shifts with an accuracy that rivals modern meteorology. Take the Gagaju people's Binange calendar, which doesn't divide the year into 4 seasons, but 6, each marked by the behavior of specific plants, animals, and stars. When the woollipa trees bloom, it signals Gurrung, the hot dry season, time to harvest bush onions. When the magpie geese arrive in Gunumileng, the pre-monsoon period, it's a warning to move camps to higher ground before the floods. These aren't rough estimates, they're fine-tuned observations honed over generations, where a single bird's call could dictate when to burn grasslands or fish for barramundi. What's revelatory is how these calendars adapt to local conditions. In Arnhem Land, the Yolngu follow Dawalkur, a calendar anchored to the flowering of the stringybark tree, an event that modern studies show coincides with the arrival of sea turtles to nest. Meanwhile, the Noongar people of southwestern Australia track Burrak, the season of little eyes, when banksia flowers drip nectar and honey ant colonies swell. Scientists have compared these markers to climate data and found something astonishing. The Noongar's Burrak aligns perfectly with the December solstice, while their Gerran, the cooler time, matches the autumn equinox, all without a single written chart or clock. The real magic lies in the storytelling. The Wardaman people's tale of the 7 sisters isn't just about the Pleiades, it's a manual. When the cluster appears at dusk, it's Yeg, time to harvest yams. When it's directly overhead at sunrise, it's Wurjeng, the cold season, signaling the emu's fat is richest for hunting. Even wind patterns are encoded. The Kunwinjku speak of Namakan, the lightning man, whose arrival with the northwest monsoons is preceded by the scent of rain on ironwood leaves, a phenomenon chemists now link to volatile oils released by humidity. But perhaps the most sophisticated systems belong to coastal clans. The Torres Strait Islanders' Zugubal calendar doesn't just track tides, it predicts them through generational memories of lunar cycles paired with the behavior of marine life. Their stories describe how the dugong's mating calls grow urgent 2 days before the highest spring tide, a pattern marine biologists have since verified, linking it to the moon's gravitational pull. Similarly, the Gumbayngur people's Jagan calendar ties the fruiting of the lily pilly to the annual migration of humpback whales, a connection oceanographers now attribute to synchronized plankton blooms. What's humbling is how these systems handle unpredictability. During the Millennium drought, when Bureau of Meteorology models faltered, Ngarrindjeri elders revived an old story about Ngurundjeri, the creator, who punished the land by holding back the rain. The tale included clues. When swamp wattle flowers wilted in a specific sequence, it meant 3 more dry years were coming. Ecologists later found these plants are hypersensitive to groundwater shifts, acting as natural moisture meters. These calendars aren't relics, they're resilient technologies. In an era of climate change, Aboriginal rangers are merging Dreamtime markers with satellite data to predict bushfires or coral spawning. The lesson is profound. Time isn't just counted in days and months, but in the flowering of a desert pea, the song of a cicada, the turn of a star. The land doesn't just tell stories, it keeps time for those who know how to listen. Along the sun-drenched shores of northern Australia, where the turquoise waters of the Great Barrier Reef now stretch, Aboriginal elders whisper of a different world, one that lies beneath the waves. The Yidinji people of Cairns sing of Gabbulbarra, the sunken plain, where their ancestors once hunted kangaroos across grassy valleys now drowned by the sea. These aren't vague legends, they're precise descriptions of the continental shelf, a vast expanse exposed during the last ice age when sea levels were nearly 400 feet lower. Modern sonar maps reveal eerie correlations. The Yidinji's hunting grounds align with submerged river channels detected off the coast, while their stories of saltwater swallowing the freshwater springs match underwater vents where fresh water still seeps through ancient aquifers. Dive deeper into these narratives and the details grow even more astonishing. The Goreng people describe Moonjun, a sacred initiation site now submerged near Fraser Island, where boys would stand on sandstone platforms to receive ceremonial scars. In 2009, marine archaeologists discovered precisely such platforms, carved with concentric circles and initiation symbols under 60 feet of water, carbon dated to over 7,000 years old. Even the story's warnings hold water quite literally. The Kuku Yalanji speak of avoiding the low coral gardens when the moon is full, a reference to areas now proven to experience extreme tidal surges where reef flats become death traps during king tides. But the most compelling evidence comes from the Torres Strait, where islander elders recite Zogola, chants that list names of now drowned volcanoes and freshwater lakes. In 2018, a team from James Cook University mapped these locations using side-scan sonar and found every single one. The chants even describe the exact depth at which ancestral fish traps can still be found, a claim verified when divers located stone structures at the precise coordinates mentioned in the songs. These traps weren't just functional. Their placement reveals an intimate understanding of prehistoric currents, with gaps positioned where fish would naturally school before sea levels rose. What's haunting is how these stories capture the trauma of displacement. The Lardil people of Mornington Island sing of Dankara, the Great Drowning, when clans were forced to retreat as the land sank like a weary tortoise. Sediment cores from the Gulf of Carpentaria tell the same story. layers of terrestrial pollen abruptly buried under marine deposits around 10,000 years ago, with shell middens left behind in what's now open ocean. The Lardell's songs don't just mourn the loss, they encode survival strategies like which inland caves would remain dry. Caves where archaeologists later found refugee campsites from that very era. Nowhere is this intersection of myth and geology more striking than at the edge of the continental shelf, 200 kilometers off modern-day Kimberley. Here, the Wa, or a people's Wandjina rock art, depicts beings with halos around their heads, standing beside animals that zoologists once dismissed as imaginary, until underwater cameras captured images of the same creatures grazing on seagrass meadows below. These weren't fantasy beasts, they were dugongs and saltwater crocodiles, species that once thrived on the now flooded coastal plains. Even the halos make sense. The art shows figures with trails of dots radiating from their heads, a pattern marine archaeologists now interpret as breath trails from divers harvesting shellfish, a practice still evident in the middens of submerged kitchen mounds. The implications ripple far beyond Australia. Similar submerged stories exist among the Maori, the Haida, and other coastal cultures, suggesting a shared global memory of post-glacial flooding. But what sets Aboriginal narratives apart is their granularity. Where other traditions speak of great deluges, Dreamtime stories pinpoint individual hills that became islands, springs that turned brackish, and reefs that grew teeth as seas rose. At a time when climate change threatens to rewrite coastlines once more, these ancient memories offer more than history. They hold a mirror to our future, proving that the land remembers even when the water covers its scars. Beneath the rust-red cliffs of Western Australia lies Wilgie Mere, a gaping ochre mine so ancient its walls seem to breathe history. To the Wadjari Yamaji people, this isn't just a pit, it's the bleeding wound of Malu, the giant kangaroo ancestor, whose spilled blood turned to the vibrant ochre that's been traded across the continent for over 30,000 years. That's no exaggeration. Archaeologists have carbon-dated charcoal from the mine's deepest layers to the same era when woolly mammoths still roamed Europe. But what's truly staggering isn't just the mine's age, it's how Dreamtime stories encode the very geology of the site, preserving knowledge that modern miners would only rediscover millennia later. Listen to the elders' descriptions of Wilgie Mere, and you'll hear something extraordinary. They speak of Malu's blood hardening into distinct layers, Gingen red, Miltieri yellow, and Madu white, each with its own ceremonial use. Geologists confirm this. The mine's cross-section reveals precise stratigraphic bands of hematite, goethite, and kaolin clays, matching the traditional color classifications exactly. Even more remarkable is how the stories warn against mining certain veins during wet seasons, when the Miltieri becomes sick and crumbles. Modern analysis shows these yellow layers are indeed more porous, absorbing moisture that destabilizes the shafts, a safety protocol embedded in oral tradition long before the concept of hydrogeology existed. The trade routes radiating from Wilgie Mere reveal another layer of sophistication. The Jukurpa dreaming tracks describe ochre's journey along songlines stretching from the Pilbara to the Flinders Ranges over 3,000 kilometers away. These aren't vague routes, they're logistical manuals. The Matu people's songs specify resting points where traders would mix ochre with animal fat to prevent spoilage, a technique later identified in ancient paint residues. At the mine itself, excavations uncovered hammerstones worn smooth from generations of use, piled neatly in caches marked by notches that match tally systems still used by elders today. But Wilgie Mere is just one thread in a continent-wide web. In South Australia, the Adnyamathanha people's stories of Ikara, the Wilpena Pound, describe Akara, serpent beings whose movements created deposits of Uri red ochre and Maku green malachite. When geologists surveyed the area, they found copper-rich seams exactly where the narratives placed them, some showing signs of prehistoric extraction. Similarly, the Gunditjmara tales of Tirundara pinpoint a volcanic crater where sacred black basalt was quarried for axe heads, its glassy flakes prized for their sharpness. Petrographic analysis proves these tools were traded as far as Tasmania, their chemical signatures tracing back to this single, storied source. The most haunting evidence of this ancient mining intelligence comes from the Ngarluma people's Burrup Peninsula rock art. Among the carvings are depictions of figures holding crescent-shaped tools long dismissed as ritual objects until archaeologists excavated 30,000-year-old moon-shaped stone picks nearby, their edges still stained with ochre. The art even shows miners wearing bindies headbands to catch sweat, a detail corroborated by mummified remains found in the Nullarbor caves, their hair still wrapped in woven fibers. What emerges is a paradigm shift. These weren't random digs, but calculated operations guided by stories that functioned as both spiritual maps and geological surveys. When a Yindjibarndi elder speaks of Jinnabura, the singing stone that hums when struck to reveal iron ore beneath, it's not metaphor. Experiments show certain high iron rocks do resonate at specific frequencies. The Dreamtime didn't just record mining history, it engineered it, blending practical science with sacred lore to sustain extraction for longer than most civilizations have existed. Perhaps the greatest lesson lies in the mine's unbroken legacy. While modern mines exhaust sites within decades, Wiljimir shows barely a scratch after 30 millennia, testament to the law that forbade over-extraction. The Wajiri Yamaji still gather ochre there today, using the same Wardu stone knives their ancestors did, following the same verses that whisper where to cut. In a world grappling with resource depletion, these stories hold a radical idea that the Earth's wealth isn't just taken but received in dialogue with the land itself. The ochre still flows, the songs still guide, and Malu's blood still paints the future as it has since the Dreamtime began. For thousands of years, the Barkindji people of the Murray-Darling Basin have told stories about Ngatji, the rainbow serpent who grows restless during times of thin water. Their elders describe cycles when the river would shrink to a trickle for years, leaving fish gasping in cracked mud, only to return in a roaring deluge that uprooted ancient river-red gums. Modern climatologists listening to these tales made a startling discovery. The descriptions match the El Niño Southern Oscillation Cycle with eerie precision, tracking droughts and floods that tree ring data confirms occurred over the past 12,000 years. The Barkindji didn't just witness these patterns, they embedded them in ceremony, carving notches into sacred trees to mark each thin water era, a practice that created an oral climate record predating European weather observations by centuries. This isn't an isolated case. Across Australia's interior, desert communities preserved memories of megadroughts so severe they reshaped cultures. The Pitjantjatjara sing of Tijukurpa Kuranpa, the time of bone-dry spirits, when clans abandoned traditional lands and adapted new survival strategies. Archaeological evidence from the Willandra Lakes reveals exactly such a crisis around 5,000 years ago, when prolonged aridity turned freshwater basins into salt pans. But here's what science alone couldn't reveal. The stories explain why some groups survived while others vanished. The Luritja people's tales credit Kunia, the Woma python, with teaching ancestors to dig deeper wells and follow rare desert blooms, knowledge later proven crucial during the megadroughts, as pollen studies show shifts in vegetation that only drought-savvy foragers could exploit. Even more astonishing are the monsoon records encoded in coastal Dreamtime narratives. Yolngu elders speak of Baru, the saltwater crocodile spirit, whose rage brings cyclones when the wind smells of burnt mangroves. Meteorologists now recognize this scent as hydrogen sulfide released by stressed coastal plants before extreme weather, a detail Western science only documented in the 1980s. The stories go further, specifying that cyclones arrive in clusters every 7 turtle generations, a cycle matching modern analysis of sediment cores showing storm surges peaking every 200 years. Perhaps the most sophisticated climate archives lie in Tasmanian Palawa songs. Their Reawarrawa stories describe glaciers advancing during the last ice age with granular detail, cold so sharp it stole children's breath, and summers when the snow never left the high plains. Ice core data from Antarctica aligns perfectly with these accounts, but the Palawa added something science couldn't: the human dimension. Their tales recount how clans adapted, sewing wallaby pelts into layered cloaks and developing heat-retaining shelters, innovations later found preserved in ancient middens. What makes these records revolutionary is their holistic perspective. Where modern climatologists rely on isolated proxies like tree rings or ice cores, Dreamtime narratives weave together atmospheric, ecological, and cultural impact. The Wardaman people's Ash Year stories, for instance, don't just describe volcanic winters, they detail how kangaroo populations crashed, how frost-resistant yam varieties were cultivated, and even how conflict patterns shifted during famines. When Mount Toba erupted 74,000 years ago, triggering a global volcanic winter, Wardaman ancestors may have witnessed its aftermath and encoded the lessons into stories that still guide food storage practices today. These oral archives challenge our assumptions about history's timeline. The Werlemin Noonga's Kora Kora long ago stories recount rising sea levels with such precision they've been used to identify submerged archaeological sites off Western Australia. Meanwhile, the Diri people's songs about Minka, the Great Thirsty Time, correlate with Antarctic ice melt events from 9,000 years ago. Memories so enduring they still dictate water-sharing laws in desert communities. In an era of accelerating climate change, these narratives offer more than just data, they provide frameworks for resilience. When Matu elders noticed brushtail possums shifting their diets during a recent drought, they revived an old story about Karara Langu, the time of changing tastes, which prompted clans to alter burn patterns to encourage drought-resistant plants. Ecologists later documented how this practice preserved biodiversity when modern methods failed. The Dreamtime doesn't just remember the climate's past, it whispers strategies for our future. For generations, Aboriginal healers have walked the bush with an intimate knowledge of the land, knowing which leaves ease pain, which bark stops infection, and which roots can calm a fever. But these aren't just folk remedies passed down through trial and error. Woven into the Dreamtime stories themselves are precise instructions for healing, encoded in the journeys of ancestral beings who shaped the medicine as they moved across the land. Take the Yidinji people's tale of Guerrilla, the spirit kangaroo who scratched his wounds on a particular tree, the bloodwood, before miraculously healing. Modern science now confirms what the elders always knew. Bloodwood sap contains powerful anticoagulant and antibacterial compounds, used for centuries to treat wounds and now studied for its potential in modern surgery. Then there's the kakadu plum, a fruit so packed with vitamin C it puts oranges to shame. The Wardaman people sing of Bilgurunga, the creator woman who gifted this fruit to her children during times of sickness, teaching them to dry it for year-round use. Researchers were stunned to find the plum's vitamin C levels are 50 times higher than most citrus, but the real revelation came when they tested traditional preparation methods. The songs describe crushing the fruit with quartz stones, a technique that lab tests show actually increases nutrient bioavailability by breaking down cell walls more effectively than metal blades. Perhaps the most profound healing narratives come from the desert, where water is scarce and survival depends on wisdom. The Pitjantjatjara tell of Mamu, the evil spirit who brings illness, and the Tijitji Tijuta children who outsmarted him by brewing tea from desert mint, a plant now proven to contain compounds that combat deadly antibiotic-resistant bacteria. The same stories warn against harvesting the mint during flowering season when its medicinal properties weaken. Scientists analyzing seasonal phytochemical variations found this wasn't superstition. the plant's active compounds drop by nearly 70% when in bloom. But the Dreamtime's medical knowledge goes even deeper. The Ungaranian people's Wandjina stories describe Janda, the sacred lizard who showed ancestors how to use spinifex resin as a dental adhesive, a practice confirmed by archaeologists who found 6,000-year-old teeth with resin fillings still intact. Today, chemists are replicating spinifex nanofibers for advanced wound dressings. Even more striking are the Yolngu birthing songs, which detail the use of acacia ash to prevent postpartum hemorrhage. Obstetricians now recognize this method crudely adopted by European settlers as black ashes medicine, mimics the effect of modern oxytocin injections by stimulating uterine contractions. What's revolutionary isn't just the accuracy of these remedies, but their holistic framework. Western medicine often isolates compounds, but Dreamtime healing integrates ecology, seasonality, and even emotional states. The Gumbayngur speak of Garlamberla, the spirit crow who taught that honey from leatherwood trees heals burns best when gathered after rain, a nuance modern studies attribute to rainwater diluting the nectar's sugars, concentrating its anti-inflammatory enzymes. Similarly, the Noongar smoking ceremonies for respiratory ailments specify using certain eucalypts only when the bark is damp, a condition that optimizes the release of therapeutic vapors. Nowhere is this synergy clearer than in the kangaroo apple, a thorny bush whose berries are toxic when unripe but transform into a powerful painkiller when mature. The Darug people's stories describe Burin, the ancestor who marked this transformation by the arrival of cicadas, a biological indicator now proven reliable as the berries ripen precisely when soil temperatures reach the threshold that triggers cicada emergences. This isn't just observation, it's a sophisticated biocalendar linking medicine to ecological cues modern science is only beginning to decode. The tragedy is how much knowledge has been lost or dismissed along the way. In the 1950s, Aboriginal healers were jailed for treating illnesses with dugong oil, ridiculed as primitive. Decades later, marine biologists discovered the oil contains unique lipids that accelerate wound healing, now used in specialized burn treatments. Similarly, the Githable people's practice of chewing acacia twigs to clean teeth was mocked until studies revealed these twigs release antimicrobial flavonoids more effective than many commercial mouthwashes. Yet the resilience of this wisdom is its greatest testament. Today, pharmacologists collaborate with elders to map songlines of healing, tracing how stories correspond to bioactive plant distributions across the continent. The results are rewriting history. What was once called bush medicine is now recognized as the world's oldest continuous medical system, with some practices dating back over 40,000 years. The Dreamtime doesn't just remember the healing plants, it remembers how to listen to them, a lesson modern medicine is finally beginning to hear. Deep in the sandstone ranges of Arnhem Land, hidden behind waterfalls and sheer cliff faces, lie chambers where the rocks themselves seem to hum with ancient energy. These are Jarang, the secret initiation sites where Aboriginal elders have guided young initiates for countless generations, places so sacred many remain undisclosed to outsiders. But when archaeologists began mapping these locations, they made a staggering discovery. Each site aligns with significant geological features and contains rock art sequences that double as ceremonial instructions. The Lamalomi caves, for instance, aren't just spiritually significant, their walls are etched with figures in precise stages of transformation, mirroring the physical and spiritual trials initiates undergo. Elders describe these images as Marga, the teaching stones, where ancestors left guides for future generations. One of the most revelatory sites is Ungaraj Ward Jubkeng, a sandstone amphitheater in Kakadu where the sound of clapping boomerangs echoes unnaturally, creating harmonic frequencies modern acousticians have measured at exactly 7.8 Hz, the same resonant frequency found in Tibetan meditation chambers. Here, the rock art depicts figures with elongated limbs and halos, postures that initiation songs describe as listening to the Earth's voice. When researchers compared these images with ground-penetrating radar data, they found the cave sits atop a massive quartz deposit, a mineral known to amplify electromagnetic fields. The elders' stories suddenly took on new meaning. Their descriptions of vibrations that opened the mind may have been referencing measurable phenomena. Further west in the Kimberley, the Wandjina galleries reveal another layer of this hidden curriculum. These towering spirit figures with haloed heads aren't just art, they are anatomical diagrams. Initiation songs describe how certain painted handprints placed over specific organs correspond to pressure points later documented in Chinese acupuncture meridians. Elders demonstrate techniques for alleviating pain by pressing these very points during ceremonies, a practice anthropologists now recognize as one of the world's oldest documented healing systems. Even the pigments themselves hold secrets. The white clay used for Wandjina halos contains high levels of calcite, which glows under moonlight, transforming these galleries into luminous teaching tools during night rituals. Perhaps the most profound initiation landscape lies in the Flinders Ranges, where the Adnyamathan, her people's Yura Muda ceremony, follows a trail of petroglyphs that map constellations only visible during specific lunar phases. The engravings, when studied with astronomical software, plot the positions of stars as they appeared 18,000 years ago, suggesting this celestial knowledge predates Mesopotamia's star charts by millennia. But the real marvel is how these sites interconnect. An elder's songline might begin at a waterhole whose mineral-rich waters induce mild altered states, proceed to a cave with infrasound resonance, and culminate at a painted gallery where flickering firelight animates the art into apparent motion. A multisensory initiation protocol refined over thousands of years. What's humbling is how these sites guard their secrets. At Juukan Gorge, before its tragic destruction in 2020, elders spoke of a hidden chamber where boys were shown the bones of the first people. Mining surveys later revealed fossils of Homo sapiens from 47,000 years ago, some of the oldest human remains in Australia buried precisely where the stories indicated. This wasn't just spiritual guidance, it was preservation of ancestral memory encoded in landscape. The Dreamtime doesn't just mark sacred sites, it is the site, a living curriculum written in stone, water, and stars, waiting for those who know how to read it. Long before satellites mapped continents or DNA traced human journeys, the Dreamtime was quietly preserving clues to one of humanity's greatest migrations, the first footsteps on Australian soil. Woven into the creation stories of Aboriginal nations are eerily precise accounts of ancestral arrivals, describing coastlines that vanished beneath rising seas and paths now swallowed by deserts. The Yolngu people sing of Barret Jolla, the time of crossing, when their ancestors walked from lands to the north before the big water came. Modern geologists confirm this. During the last ice age, when sea levels were over 200 feet lower, Australia and New Guinea formed a single landmass called Sahul, connected by a savanna corridor that's now the flooded Arafura Sea. The stories even describe landmarks along this vanished highway, like the Twin Hills that stood at the crossing point, matching bathymetric scans showing two now submerged peaks along the ancient route. What's revelatory isn't just the geographical accuracy, but the ecological details. The Wardaman people's Gayang stories recount ancestors following the sweet water vines across the journey, a reference to pandanus palms, whose roots retain drinkable moisture and whose fossilized pollen traces the exact migration corridor scientists reconstructed using genomic data. Similarly, the Tiwi Islanders' tales of Mertankola, the creator woman who led her people south, specify eating the eggs of the thunderbird along the way. Archaeologists have found eggshell fragments from Genyornis, a giant flightless bird that went extinct 45,000 years ago, scattered at campsites along this hypothesized path. These aren't vague legends, they're survival logs preserving memories of resources critical to crossing a continent. Even more astonishing are the temporal clues. The Muruweri people's Bayame epic describes the first sunrise after the crossing, when ancestors saw the great mountain smoke, likely volcanic eruptions from the now dormant peaks near present-day Townsville. Geochemical dating of lava flows matches this description to eruptions around 65,000 years ago, aligning perfectly with archaeological evidence from Majidbeb, Australia's oldest known occupation site. The stories go further, noting how the newcomers avoided the valleys that breathed fire, a warning that correlates with active geothermal fields along migration routes still hazardous today. But the most compelling evidence lies in the Dreamtime's maritime memories. The Kunwinjku of Arnhem Land tell of Nagor, the first canoe people, who navigated from islands to the north using star ropes tied to the Magellanic Clouds, a celestial reference that oceanographers now recognize as a viable navigation method for crossing the Wallace Line, the deep sea barrier between Asia and Sahel. These stories detail ocean currents and migratory seabird patterns that mirror modern reconstructions of prehistoric voyaging routes. When archaeologists discovered 40,000-year-old fish hooks on Timor, matching descriptions in Nagor songs, it confirmed these narratives weren't just metaphors, they were ancestral memory preserved across hundreds of generations. Perhaps the most poignant thread is how these stories capture the emotional weight of migration. The Jugun people sing of Jalganaru, the long goodbye, when groups split to follow different songlines inland. Genetic studies of Aboriginal populations show deep divergences in mitochondrial DNA lineages dating back to this exact period, proof that communities dispersed rapidly after arrival. The songs don't just mark this event, they mourn it, describing tears salting the earth where kin parted ways, leaving marking trees that dendrochronologists have identified as ancient carved baobabs along dispersal routes. What emerges is a living archive of human resilience, where science pieces together migration through scattered artifacts and genetic markers. The Dreamtime offers something richer, the sensory, emotional tapestry of the journey itself. The smell of saltgrass guiding clans to freshwater, the sound of unfamiliar nightbirds in a new land, the taste of warogga berries ripening along the coast, these aren't just details. They're the unbroken thread connecting modern Australians to their unimaginably ancient past. The land didn't just witness this migration, it remembers, and through the Dreamtime it still speaks. Imagine standing beneath a vast outback sky when suddenly a searing light tears through the heavens, followed by an earth-shaking roar as fire rains from above. To the errant people of Central Australia, this wasn't just a cataclysmic event. It became Tinorolla, the sacred crater where the celestial baby fell to earth. Their stories describe a star spirit striking the land with such force it left a gaping wound in the desert, an account that mirrors the real geological formation of Goss's Bluff, a 22-million-year-old meteor crater visible from space. But what's startling isn't just the parallel between myth and science. It's how many other Aboriginal groups preserved nearly identical tales of cosmic collisions, complete with details modern researchers are only now verifying. Take the Henbury craters near Alice Springs, 12 depressions spanning 5,000 feet, formed when a meteorite shattered Madeira around 4,700 years ago. The Luritja people's oral traditions describe fire devil stones screaming down from the sky, igniting grasslands and leaving pits where the earth wept iron. When geologists analyzed the site in the 1930s, they found something astonishing. The Luritja stories pinpointed exactly where the largest fragments landed, even referencing the unusual nickel-iron composition of the meteorites, a detail impossible to discern without modern tools. Elders had long warned against collecting water from certain craters, calling them Punctu cursed. Tests later revealed these pools contained high levels of radioactivity from meteoritic minerals, proving the warnings weren't superstition, but survival wisdom passed through generations. The precision grows even more striking when examining stories from distant regions. On the other side of the continent, the Noongar people of Western Australia recount Mandinga, a time when the sky cracked open and a burning stone plunged into the sea near what's now Cape Naturaliste. Ocean surveys in the area have since identified an underwater impact structure dating to roughly the same era as Henbury, with tektite's glass-like meteor debris matching those found scattered across Noongar territory. Their songs describe the aftermath tsunamis that reshaped the coastline and a black sand that cut like knives, later identified as impact-formed obsidian flakes still littering beaches today. What's revelatory is how these stories encode astrophysical details. The Yidinji of Queensland speak of Gugumal, a fiery messenger from the Milky Way that spun like a twirling spear before impact, a description aligning perfectly with modern footage of meteorites fragmenting during atmospheric entry. Similarly, the Wardaman describe Ungaljod, the Rainbow Serpent, thrashing its tail to create thunder without clouds, an uncanny parallel to the ionospheric shockwaves detected after the 2013 Chelyabinsk meteor. Some narratives even reference secondary effects. The Diri people's tales of Minka Mankana, the years of cold sun, match the climatic cooling expected from impact-triggered dust veils, with ice core records showing a temperature dip around 4,500 years ago precisely when Henbury struck. Perhaps the most haunting accounts come from the Kimberley, where Wandjina rock art depicts figures with halos surrounded by falling star-like objects. Elders interpret these as sky beings bringing warnings of celestial dangers. In 2020, researchers studying the art's mineral pigments found nanodiamonds, microscopic structures typically formed by extreme pressure like that from a meteoritic airburst. The paintings aren't just symbolic, they may be eyewitness records of a cosmic event preserved in ochre for millennia. These narratives don't just recall disasters, they teach resilience. The Pitjantjatjara describe how ancestors survived the Tjitji-Tjuta ash winters by shifting to drought-resistant foods, a strategy paleoecologists confirm through pollen records showing abrupt changes in vegetation after impact. In an era where near-Earth object tracking is a modern priority, these stories offer something profound, a reminder that the sky's memory is long, and its lessons, if heeded, might just save us again. Along the winding river systems of Australia's southeast, the Gunditjmara people have maintained an astonishing secret for thousands of years, an intricate network of stone fish traps so precisely engineered they still function today. These aren't just random piles of rock, they're living manifestations of Dreamtime wisdom, where the ancestral creator Budgebim is said to have molded the landscape itself into a vast aquaculture system. What's remarkable isn't just the trap's existence, but how the stories behind them encode hydraulic principles Western science wouldn't formalize until the 19th century. The Gunditjmara sing of Kurtanich, the eel ancestor who taught them to build weirs with stones that dance with the current, a poetic description of flow dynamics, where strategically placed gaps create turbulence to guide fish into holding ponds. Modern engineers testing these designs found they outperform modern hatchery systems in both efficiency and sustainability, with water velocities calibrated to millisecond precision. The genius lies in the details. At Lake Kundar, the traps incorporate angled walls that exploit the eel's instinct to swim against the current, funneling them seamlessly into woven baskets. Elders describe this in the Tijan story, where the trickster Crow Wong learns that rivers have a heartbeat, a metaphor for the pulsing seasonal flows that dictate trap placement. Hydrologists now recognize these pulses as biannual discharge patterns, synchronized with eel migrations. Even more impressive are the story's maintenance protocols. Songs specify realigning stones when certain flowers bloom, coinciding with pre-spawning periods when eels are heaviest. Archaeologists have found layers of repaired stones dating back 6,000 years, each realignment matching climatic shifts recorded in nearby stalagmites. But the Gunditjmara system is just one thread in a continent-wide tapestry of indigenous engineering. In Arnhem Land, the Yolngu Mata stories describe how the ancestral shark Beru taught clans to build tidal traps using mangrove stakes arranged in parabolic curves. These designs, still visible at Blue Mud Bay, harness lunar cycles capturing fish on outgoing tides while allowing juvenile escape routes. The narratives even warn against overharvesting. Take only what the moon can refill, a principle modern fisheries scientists now advocate as temporal zoning. Further north, the Torres Strait Islanders cod songs detail how to construct stepped rock pools that temper seawater with freshwater springs, creating ideal conditions for shellfish cultivation. When marine biologists mapped these systems, they found microecologies with salinity gradients accurate to 5 parts per thousand, a precision requiring generations of observation. Perhaps the most revolutionary aspect is how these stories marry physics with ecology. The Ungarangeri people's Kondole tales don't just describe fish traps, they explain how to use woven grass filters to oxygenate water, a technique later identified as biofiltration. Similarly, the Wiradjuri Gugar legends encode the acoustics of stone placements, noting that when the wind sings through the gaps, the cod come running. Underwater microphones at Brewerina's traps revealed the stones emit low-frequency vibrations that attract fish, a phenomenon commercial fisheries now replicate with electronic lures. What makes these systems extraordinary is their resilience. Unlike concrete dams that collapse when conditions change, Aboriginal traps adapt. The stories speak of listening to the river's mood, adjusting weirs during droughts to prevent stagnation. At Budge Bim, elders recently revived a trap system after a century of disuse, guided solely by songlines, and within months, eel populations rebounded to pre-colonial levels. In an era grappling with sustainable food solutions, these ancient narratives don't just describe engineering feats, they offer a radical blueprint, one where technology isn't imposed on nature but whispered into being by it. The land didn't just inspire these designs, it co-created them through stories as enduring as the stones themselves. Hidden within the rhythms of Dreamtime stories lies a linguistic map, one that stretches across the continent, linking Aboriginal groups separated by thousands of miles. The clues are subtle but staggering. Shared root words for sacred concepts, identical grammatical structures in creation narratives, and even matching place names that appear like breadcrumbs along ancient songlines. Take the word Tijukurpa, used by the Pitjantjatjara people to describe the dreaming. Nearly 3,000 kilometers away, the Yolngu of Arnhem Land use Jalkiri, a term that, despite the distance, shares the same linguistic roots meaning foundation or footprint. These aren't coincidences, they're remnants of a proto-language scholars believe connected Aboriginal cultures as far back as 50,000 years ago. Dig deeper and the patterns grow even more intriguing. The Wardaman people's stories of the lightning spirit Namakan include a specific verb tense for actions that occur cyclically, a grammatical quirk also found in the durable tales of Queensland, despite these groups being separated by nearly the entire continent. Linguists call this a linguistic isolate, a rare feature that shouldn't persist across such vast distances unless carried by a shared ancestral culture. Even more compelling are the Wandjina stories of the Kimberley, which use a unique prefix system to denote sacred knowledge, Wandi for celestial events, Ungari for earthly ones, a structure mirrored exactly in the Ungarangeri water narratives of South Australia. The real revelation comes when these linguistic threads intersect with geography. The word for rainbow serpent varies Uolunga in Arnhem Land, Wolunqua in the central desert, but the core morpheme lunga or lunqua consistently ties to water sources. Track these terms on a map, and they cluster along ancient river systems now buried under desert sands, hinting at a time when these routes were thriving corridors of exchange. Similarly, the suffix bari, meaning creator being, appears in coastal stories from the Torres Strait to the Spencer Gulf, suggesting a maritime network that carried language as reliably as trade goods. Perhaps the most astonishing evidence lies in toponyms, place names that repeat like echoes across the land. The term Kari, meaning fire, appears in volcanic sites from Victoria's Karijini to Western Australia's Kariweri, areas geologically active during human occupation. Even more telling are the mother words. Ngama breast marks caves with natural springs in over a dozen Aboriginal languages, while Bim stone identifies sacred quarries from Tasmania to the top end. These aren't just labels, they're coded survival guides preserving the locations of water, tools, and shelter in a continent where such knowledge meant life or death. What's humbling is how these connections endured. When European linguists first recorded Aboriginal languages in the 19th century, they assumed the diversity meant isolation. But the Dreamtime stories knew better. The Gunditjmara tale of Tarn Wirrung, the Great Flood, uses the same narrative structure as the Muruwari's Bayame epic, down to parallel verses describing the salty tongue of the sea licking the land. This isn't just storytelling, it's a linguistic time capsule proving that across deserts and mountains, through ice ages and droughts, the first Australians weren't just connected. They were conversant, their words weaving a web as vast and resilient as the land itself. Deep in the labyrinthine caves of the Kimberley, where the ochre-stained walls shimmer with the ghosts of antiquity, a secret language awaits decoding, not in letters but in layers of pigment and symbolism. The Wandjina figures, with their haloed heads and hollow eyes, have long perplexed archaeologists, but to the Warora, Ngurranian, and Wunnambul people, these aren't just paintings, they're chapters in a living library. Each stroke encodes ecological wisdom, celestial events, and even moral laws, passed down through Dreamtime narratives that act as cipher keys. Take the Wandjina's distinctive, mouthless feature, a detail outsiders once dismissed as artistic choice. Elders explain it's a deliberate prohibition. These sky beings are so powerful, their breath alone could summon cyclones, so their lips remain sealed unless invoked in ceremony. Modern meteorologists have since correlated Wandjina art clusters with regions most frequently struck by tropical storms, suggesting these galleries double as ancient weather maps. But the coding runs deeper than weather warnings. At the enigmatic clothes peg figures of the Bradshaw/Guion paintings, elders recite creation stories describing ancestral beings who left their marks like bird tracks on wet sand. Microscopic analysis reveals these intricate human silhouettes were indeed painted during periods of higher humidity, their fine brushstrokes only possible on damp rock. Even more remarkable are the color sequences: red ochre overlain by white pipeclay, then yellow minerals, a layering that corresponds to initiation stages in local dreaming ceremonies. The pigments themselves hold meaning. X-ray fluorescence shows the reds came from hematite deposits 200 kilometers away, while the whites were gathered from sacred kaolin pits near waterholes, each source tied to specific songlines. These aren't random choices, they're a material language where the very chemistry of the paint whispers its provenance and purpose. The true breakthrough came when linguists noticed recurring symbols across widely separated sites: zigzags near water sources, concentric circles at birthing caves, cross-hatching where trade routes intersected. At first dismissed as decorative, these motifs proved consistent enough to function as a proto-writing system. In Lamalomi country, elders demonstrated how a series of dots radiating from a central line depicted not just a campsite, but the number of families present, moon phases, and even game availability. Similar symbols in Arnhem Land's X-ray art correspond to anatomical diagrams in healing songs, where the positioning of a kangaroo's painted vertebrae matches pressure points described for treating back injuries. This isn't just art, it's a multimodal encyclopedia blending infographics with oral tradition. Perhaps the most startling revelation lies in the gallery's astronomical alignments. At Drysdale River, certain Wandjina faces glow under UV light during winter solstice dawn, a phenomenon researchers realized occurs through deliberate mineral treatments. The stories explain why these are morning star teachers, celestial guides whose activation at solstice heralds the arrival of monsoon winds. Even the cave's acoustics play a role. In Ngorwudu's shelter, sound engineers found that chanting certain dreaming songs before specific paintings creates resonant frequencies that make secondary images hidden under layers of calcite temporarily visible through vibration patterns. The elders knew to read these walls, you don't just look, you listen. What emerges is a radical rethinking of prehistoric communication. Where Western scholars once saw primitive sketches, the Dreamtime reveals an intricate knowledge network, one where art stores generational data as reliably as any hard drive. From navigational charts to genealogies, medicinal recipes to cosmic calendars, these galleries were never meant to be mere pictures. They were Australia's first interactive textbooks, their lessons waiting patiently for those who know the stories to turn their pages. Beneath the surface of Dreamtime stories lie battle strategies so sophisticated they'd make a modern general take notes, not in the language of war, but in the metaphors of ancestor spirits and animal totems. The Wardaman people's tales of Agjagbula and Jabaringi, two creator brothers locked in eternal struggle, aren't just myths, they're encrypted manuals for guerrilla warfare. The brothers' legendary clash describes feigned retreats to lure enemies into narrow gorges, tactical use of fire to control battlefields, and even psychological warfare by mimicking animal cries, techniques later documented in early European accounts of Aboriginal resistance. What outsiders once dismissed as fanciful storytelling now reveals itself as intergenerational preservation of combat knowledge, where every twist in the narrative corresponds to a real-world tactical principle. Take the Kamilaroi Bayam epics, where the Sky Heroes' battles with the Rainbow Serpent encode lessons in terrain exploitation. The stories specify fighting where the ironbark trees grow thick, referencing the dense forests of the Liverpool Range that provided natural fortifications during conflicts. Archaeological surveys of these areas reveal strategically placed rock shelters with overlapping sightlines perfect for ambushes, exactly where the songs describe Bayam outmaneuvering his foe. Even the serpent's coiling strikes translate to a documented combat style using hooked boomerangs to disarm opponents, a technique later adopted by some frontier settlers for close-quarters fighting. The real genius lies in how these stories preserve territorial intelligence. The Pitjantjatjara Tijukurpa recounts how the Watikatjara, two lizard men, marked boundaries with songlines that doubled as early warning systems. Certain verses describe listening stones, resonant rock formations that amplify footsteps placed along disputed borders. Geologists have since identified these as naturally occurring lithophones, stones that produce distinct tones when struck, functioning exactly as described in the narratives. Similarly, the Yolngu Jalkiri stories detail how clans used whisper sticks, hollow tubes planted in the ground, to detect vibrations from approaching groups, a prehistoric form of seismic surveillance later rediscovered by military engineers. Perhaps the most startling revelations come from the Kimberley's Wandjina battle narratives. These stories describe shield laws, rules of engagement where certain painted designs on shields dictated combat protocols. A zigzag pattern might signal a challenge to single combat, while concentric circles indicated a temporary truce. Museum conservators examining 19th-century shields found these designs matched exactly to traditional descriptions, with mineral analysis revealing pigments from ritually significant sites. The stories even encode counterintelligence tactics. The Gagaju people's tales of Naman the Trickster include verses about spreading false songlines to mislead enemy scouts, a practice anthropologists corroborate through records of conflicting route information given to early explorers. But this wasn't just about conflict, it was about calculated deterrence. The Adnyamathanha Akara stories describe how serpent beings created singing trenches, gullies where wind howling through narrow gaps produced eerie tones to ward off intruders. Acoustics experts measuring these formations found they emit frequencies at the threshold of human discomfort, creating natural sonic barriers. Similarly, the Ungarangary's Ungurundari epics speak of phantom war parties, elaborate systems of fire and shadow puppetry used to exaggerate a clan's numbers. Early settlers' journals reluctantly admit falling for these illusions during nighttime skirmishes. What emerges is a radical rethinking of pre-colonial warfare. These weren't random skirmishes, but highly organized systems governed by spiritual protocols and ecological wisdom. The Diri people's emu calling tactics, mimicking the birds' alarm cries to coordinate attacks, mirror modern battlefield communications. The Eora nation's harbor defense strategies, preserved in stories of Barangaru the warrior queen, prefigured naval guerrilla tactics by centuries. In an era when indigenous military prowess was systematically downplayed, the Dreamtime stands as an unbroken record not just of how First Nations fought, but how they turned warfare into an art form as nuanced as the land itself. High on the sandstone plateaus of Arnhem Land, ancient boulders stand arranged in patterns that seem random until you witness the winter solstice sunrise. Then shadows stretch like pointing fingers across precisely carved grooves, aligning with distant mountain peaks in a spectacle the Yolngu people have known for generations. These aren't just rocks, they're Juliri, living astronomical observatories where Dreamtime stories and celestial movements intertwine. The elders speak of Barnumber, the morning star Venus, whose path is marked by stones placed to track its 8-year cycle, a pattern European astronomers wouldn't document until the 1600. But the real revelation lies in the grooves. Microscopic analysis reveals where patterns matching the repetitive notching of tally sticks, suggesting generations of skywatchers recorded planetary movements here long before the invention of the telescope. Venture west to the Walpiri lands, and you'll find the Walukurlangu fire ceremony site, where upright stones frame the heliacal rising of the Pleiades. The stories say the cluster called Yopiri was placed by the ancestral women to signal the onset of Purluwanpa, the season when desert oak flowers sweeten and honey ants fatten. Modern astronomers found these stones aren't just symbolic. Their alignment accounts for atmospheric refraction, compensating for the visual distortion of the horizon. Even more astonishing, the ceremonial dances performed here encode the cluster's 26,000-year precession cycle, with each dancer's position representing a millennia in the celestial timeline. This isn't just ceremony, it's astrophysics in motion. The sophistication reaches its peak at Ungaut, a limestone cliff in Ungarangari country incised with thousands of zigzagging lines. Outsiders once dismissed them as idle scratching, but elders knew better. These are lunar calendars tracking the moon's 18-6-year wobble cycle. The Kunkarankara Seven Sisters story describes how each groove corresponds to moonrises over nearby Pondi, the Murray River's bend. When archaeologists superimposed lunar phase data onto the carvings, they found a near-perfect match including annotations for eclipse seasons. The cliff's acoustics amplify whispers at certain alignments, allowing timekeepers to relay observations across distances without breaking night vision. Perhaps the most haunting observatory lies in Queensland's Birri Rock art. Here, the Dakhan spirit depicted with star-filled eyes holds a boomerang that aligns with the Milky Way's dark emu formation during the summer solstice. But the true genius emerges at dawn. Sunlight filters through a fissure, projecting the emu's silhouette onto a painted star map exactly when its real-world counterpart, the Gugayimajir people's name for the Coalsack Nebula, dips below the horizon. This isn't just art, it's a celestial clock synchronizing terrestrial and cosmic cycles with a precision that challenges our assumptions about primitive astronomy. What's humbling is how these sites adapt. The Gulumaurigin lunar calendars near Darwin include leap months carved in smaller strokes, an adjustment for the metonic cycle, where solar and lunar years realign every 19 years. Similarly, the Tiwi people's Pukumani poles aren't just grave markers. Their shadows trace the sun's declination shifts like a gnomon on a sundial, warning of monsoon onset. In an age where light pollution obscures the stars, these silent stone teachers remind us the sky was humanity's first clock, compass, and classroom, and the Dreamtime its most enduring textbook. The lesson isn't just in the accuracy, but the integration. Where Western astronomy separates observation from storytelling, Aboriginal sites marry them. The Pleiades aren't just stars, but ancestors. The moon isn't a rock, but a wayward hunter. To stand at Guerrilla as Venus rises is to witness a paradigm where science and spirit never divorced, where every cosmic event is a verse in an unbroken song older than Stonehenge, richer than Ptolemy's charts. The land doesn't just hold these observatories, it sings with them, if we're willing to listen. Along the vast coastline of northern Australia, where the turquoise waters of the Arafura Sea meet the coral-fringed shores of Arnhem Land, the Yolngu people have long told stories of Beru, the ancestral shark who carved paths through the waves. These aren't just myths, they're intricate navigational charts passed down through songlines, guiding generations across treacherous currents to distant islands with pinpoint accuracy. What sounds like legend is, in fact, a sophisticated maritime system, one that allowed Aboriginal voyagers to traverse waters spanning hundreds of kilometers without compasses or written maps, using cues hidden in the stars, tides, and even the behavior of marine life. The genius lies in the details of these stories. The Larrakit song cycles, for instance, describe how Beru's dorsal fin points to submerged reefs by day, while at night, bioluminescent algae swirl in patterns that reveal safe passages. Modern marine biologists have confirmed this phenomenon. Certain algae species near the Wessel Islands indeed glow brighter where underwater ridges deflect nutrient-rich upwellings, creating natural highway markers visible after dusk. Even more precise are the Yolngu's tales of Garutu, the kinship system that assigns familial ties to ocean currents. The songs map the relationship between the eastward-flowing Jama monsoon current and its child, the counter-current Werwer, which runs closer to shore. Hydrographers studying historic tidal data found these narratives accurately depict seasonal flow patterns that European sailors didn't document until the 1800s. But the real marvel is how this knowledge was tested and refined. The Anandiliaqua people of Groot Isle and sing of Mamarikangu, the stingray spirit who taught ancestors to read the ocean's surface for hidden dangers. Their stories specify that when certain wave patterns Yurikala appear as crow's feet on the water, they signal submerged rocks beneath. Naval architects now recognize these as capillary wave interference, a phenomenon only visible under specific wind conditions. The songs even dictate the optimal angle to approach such hazards. Information later found etched into 400-year-old bark canoe designs recovered from coastal middens. Venture east to the Torres Strait and the stories grow even more astonishing. The Korag people's Tagai narratives don't just describe constellations, they encode a celestial compass tuned to the region's unique marine environment. Unlike Western star charts centered on Polaris, Tagai's left hand, the Southern Cross aligns with the seasonal migration of Wadar, the green turtle, while his canoe Orion's belt marks the onset of the kooky southeast trade winds. Astronomers comparing these systems to historical wind records found the stars' positions correlate with wind shifts down to a 3-day window, a level of precision critical for outrigger voyages across open ocean. Perhaps the most compelling evidence of this ancient nautical intelligence lies in the Kayardild people's stories of Dulkawong, the Phantom Island. Their songs recount a landmass that vanished beneath the waves, where ancestors once gathered turtle eggs. For years, scholars dismissed this as allegory until sonar scans revealed a submerged plateau near Mornington Island, matching the description exactly. complete with fossilized turtle nesting sites carbon dated to 7,000 years ago. The songs even preserved the island's freshwater spring locations, later identified through underwater aquifer mapping. This maritime wisdom wasn't just about survival, it shaped culture. The Tiwi people's Pukumane funeral poles, when studied closely, double as tidal calculators. Their carved notches correspond to lunisolar cycles, allowing mourners to time sea crossings for burial ceremonies when currents were safest. Similarly, the Gumatj clan's Manake songs list sea marks in sequence not by location, but by the time it takes to paddle between them at a specific stroke rhythm. Oceanographers timing these journeys found the songs' tempos perfectly account for tidal assistance, effectively creating melodic GPS. Today, these stories are experiencing a renaissance. Indigenous rangers are merging Dreamtime navigation with modern technology, using star compass references to track reef health or predict cyclone paths. But the deeper lesson remains: the ocean wasn't just a wilderness to conquer. It was a teacher, its rhythms etched into song, its dangers and gifts woven into stories that still guide us. To navigate by the Dreamtime isn't just to follow a map, it's to hear the sea itself whispering its secrets across generations. For millennia, the crackle of controlled burns has echoed through Australia's landscapes, not as destruction but as renewal. These fires aren't random, they're part of an ancient ecological calendar embedded in Dreamtime stories, where every flame carries the wisdom of ancestors who shaped the land with deliberate precision. The Kakadu people's tales of Warramurangunji, the creator being who gifted fire to humanity, don't just describe its power, they encode burn protocols. Her journey across Arnhem Land correlates with modern fire maps showing mosaic patterns that maximize biodiversity, where patches of freshly burned land border mature growth to create habitats for species from wallabies to finches. The brilliance lies in the story's specificity. The Gunditjmara speak of Korok, the eel ancestor, whose seasonal movements dictated when to ignite wetlands to stimulate reed growth for weaving, a practice ecologists now recognize as preventing catastrophic fires by reducing fuel loads during dry spells. Similarly, the Noongar Kari fire hawk narratives describe how certain birds of prey spread embers to flush out prey, a behavior documented by researchers in the Kimberley. But the stories go further. They name which tree species, like the hardy Banksia serrata, rely on these low-intensity burns to release their seeds, ensuring the next generation takes root. What's revolutionary is how these narratives adapt to local conditions. In the tropical north, Yolngu elders recite the Garutu song cycle, which links controlled burns to the flowering of Ganibu cycad palms. The songs warn against fires during the palm's fruiting season when toxins concentrate in the seeds, a detail later confirmed by chemists analyzing seasonal toxin fluctuations. Meanwhile, central desert communities like the Pintupi celebrate Wanampi, the water serpent whose awakening in cool months signals the safest burning window, when winds are predictable and soil moisture preserves root systems. Satellite imagery of these regions reveals a staggering pattern. Areas managed under traditional burning stories have 40% fewer wildfires than parks using modern suppression methods. The stories don't just prevent disasters, they engineer abundance. Martu elders in Western Australia sing of Kirti, the ancestral quail whose nesting grounds flourish after small, patchy fires. These narratives guide burns that create staggered regrowth stages, supporting everything from bilbies to rare skinks. Biodiversity surveys in Martu managed lands show higher species richness than adjacent conservation zones, proving what elders always knew. Fire isn't the enemy, it's a sculptor, shaping the land as deliberately as a potter molds clay. Perhaps the most poignant lessons emerge from fire's absence. When colonial authorities banned cultural burning in the 20th century, catastrophic wildfires ravaged landscapes that had flourished for millennia. The Gamilaraay people's Bundara stories, which once warned of the great choking when fires were suppressed, became reality as thick undergrowth fueled infernos. Now, scientists partner with elders to revive these practices, using Dreamtime stories as ecological blueprints. In Cape York, rangers follow the Cuckoo Thaypan fire songlines, reigniting mosaic burns that have dropped wildfire incidents by 70%. The land remembers what we forgot, that fire is kin, not conqueror. When a Jar Jar Wurrung elder lights a ceremonial flame today, they're not just reducing fuel loads, they're speaking a language older than agriculture, one where every wisp of smoke carries a promise of balance. The Dreamtime doesn't just describe this balance, it lives it, teaching us that the best way to protect the future might just be listening to the past. What if the oldest living culture on Earth has been quietly waiting for modern science to catch up? In recent decades, researchers across multiple disciplines have stumbled upon astonishing validations of Aboriginal Dreamtime knowledge, not as mythology, but as precise observations preserved for tens of thousands of years. Take the case of the Gunditjmara people's aquaculture systems in Victoria. For generations, their stories described Budgebim, the ancestral creator who shaped the landscape into eel traps and channels. When archaeologists mapped the area with ground-penetrating radar, they uncovered an extensive network of stone structures dating back 6,500 years older than the pyramids, with hydraulic engineering so advanced it still functions today. But the real revelation came when biologists studied local eel migration patterns. The traps aligned perfectly with the life cycle of short-finned eels, exploiting their instinct to swim against currents during specific lunar phases. A behavioral detail the Gunditjmara encoded in songlines long before Western marine biology existed. This isn't an isolated phenomenon. Geneticists studying ancient human dispersal recently made a breakthrough by cross-referencing DNA evidence with Aboriginal songlines. The Wardaman people's Gayeng stories trace ancestral journeys along sweet water vines, pandanus palms, whose distribution matches genetic markers of early human migration routes across northern Australia. Even more strikingly, the songlines pinpoint oasis clusters where genomic data shows populations bottleneck during droughts. Elders had preserved not just the routes but the survival strategies. Verses detail how to extract water from the palm's roots, a technique modern survival experts now teach. Meanwhile, in the Kimberley, astronomers analyzing Wandjina rock art discovered depictions of a starburst event, likely the supernova that created the Vela remnant, which would have been visible 11,000 years ago. The painting's haloed figures match historical records of the event's luminosity, proving these weren't symbolic images but celestial observations recorded with scientific intent. The field of climatology has also turned to Dreamtime narratives for insights. Yolngu elders describe Baru, the saltwater crocodile spirit, whose rage correlates with cyclone seasons when the wind smells of burnt mangroves. Meteorologists identified this scent as hydrogen sulfide released by stressed coastal plants before extreme weather, a detail Western science only documented in the 1980s. But the stories go further, specifying that cyclones arrive in clusters every 7 turtle generations. A cycle sediment cores confirm occurs roughly every 200 years. Similarly, the Diri people's songs about Minka, the Great Thirsty Time, align with Antarctic ice core records showing abrupt droughts 9,000 years ago, memories so precise they still dictate water-sharing laws in desert communities today. Perhaps the most humbling validations come from pharmacology, when researchers tested the medicinal properties of Duboisia hopwoodii, a shrub long used by Pitjantjatjara healers as a painkiller. They isolated a compound called scopolamine, now a key ingredient in modern motion sickness drugs. The healers' preparation methods described in Tijukurpa stories involve harvesting the plant at dawn when alkaloid concentrations peak, a nuance chemists attribute to overnight dew triggering biochemical changes. Similarly, the kangaroo appleberry, toxic when unripe but medicinal when mature, is harvested by Darug healers precisely when cicadas emerge, a biological indicator now proven to coincide with the berry's biochemical transformation. These aren't folk remedies, they're time-tested protocols rivaling clinical trials. The most poignant rediscoveries, however, lie in ecological management. After the catastrophic 2019 bushfires, scientists watched in awe as landscapes managed under Aboriginal fire protocols where Dreamtime stories dictated small, seasonal burns showed remarkable resilience. Satellite data revealed these areas had 30% more biodiversity than parks managed by modern suppression methods. In Cape York, rangers revived the Cuckoo Thaypan fire songlines, reigniting mosaic burns that dropped wildfire incidents by 70%. The land itself seems to remember what the stories never forgot. That fire isn't an enemy but a partner in renewal. What's emerging is a paradigm shift from viewing Dreamtime as allegory to recognizing it as a sophisticated knowledge system. When astrophysicists consult elders about star sequences in Barnumber songs, or marine biologists map fish migrations using Manichae chants, they're not just validating the past, they're collaborating on solutions for the future. The Dreamtime isn't just history, it's a bridge spanning millennia to remind us that some truths are timeless, and science, in its relentless pursuit of evidence, is finally hearing the land's oldest voices. From the celestial pathways of the songlines to the seismic wisdom encoded in volcanic stories, these 25 hidden histories reveal something extraordinary. Aboriginal knowledge systems aren't just ancient traditions. They're living sciences, refined over tens of thousands of years with a precision that continues to astonish modern researchers. Each narrative, each ritual, each brushstroke on a rock wall holds layers of insight, ecological, astronomical, medicinal, proving that the Dreamtime is far more than mythology. It's a vast, intergenerational library where the land itself is both the shelf and the text, waiting to be read by those who know its language. What's humbling is how urgently these systems speak to our present. As climate scientists scramble to model rising sea levels, Aboriginal flood stories preserved for millennia offer granular accounts of past inundations, complete with survival strategies. While modern medicine battles antibiotic resistance, healers in Arnhem Land are reviving plant-based remedies whose efficacy is now confirmed in labs. Even our approach to fire management is being rewritten as land rangers merge Dreamtime burning practices with satellite technology to prevent catastrophic wildfires. The lesson is clear: these aren't relics of the past but blueprints for a sustainable future. Yet this wisdom remains fragile. Rock art fades, songlines fracture, and languages disappear as the keepers of this knowledge grow fewer. Protecting it isn't just about cultural preservation, it's about safeguarding humanity's oldest continuous dialogue with the earth. Every Wandjina painting decoded, every songline mapped, every healing ritual remembered is a thread reconnected in a tapestry of understanding that spans 65,000 years. So what's your thread? Which hidden history left you awestruck? Was it the megafauna memories etched in stone, the volcanic prophecies whispered in ceremony, or the celestial maps woven into star songs? Share your thoughts below and let's keep this conversation alive, because the Dreamtime isn't just Australia's story, it's a testament to what's possible when humans listen deeply to the world around them. And that's a legacy worth honoring, learning from, and fiercely protecting.